Hey, there's a thought experiment in my head, and I say thought experiment because it's by no means a complete thought, and the conclusions that I've come to have absolutely no practical application at this point. Only because the principles themselves in the question is entirely case by case for every individual, and they're being led by the Lord, as most things are actually, but as I say, it's not that there's one path and a specific set of decisions that you must make to please God and so forth, but there's a specific path, a set of principles and guidelines in a specific way to make decisions that will determine how good you're doing, if you want to say it like that, how much good you are doing in that you're pleasing God and serving others and being a witness and ambassador for Christ, and how much you will and therefore be blessed by God and experience the peace and the joy and the security in your citizenship in heaven and your relationship to your Heavenly Father and your relationship to your brothers and sisters in Christ, your relationship to the circumstances in your life, and being content in whatever state you are in, whether that's tied in the bottom of a cold, dark, vermin-infested cell, or doing really well for yourself, if you want to put it like that. Because God has different avenues and different paths for each and every individual. And the measure of the quality of that, your quality of life, from a spiritual perspective, from a biblical perspective, is not even necessarily how okay you are with what's going on, or how sustained you are, how independent or dependent you are, how easy life is, or how difficult and fulfilling and whatever. It is whatsoever you do with all of your heart as unto the Lord. And so, beyond just the usual blessing and goodness of God in our lives, because His mercies are new every morning, His grace continues to be sufficient, and He continues to do exceedingly abundantly beyond what we could ask or imagine. He continues to give us good. He is the giver of every good and perfect gift, and that will never change. He even has mercy and blesses those that are at enmity with Him, those that oppose Him directly. That's just how good of a God He is. And again, this has come up recently in conversation, but to determine if we're in a place where we feel like, I don't know if this is where I should be, or I don't know if this is pleasing to God, or I don't know if this is beneficial for my spiritual health, or whatever it is. You get the principles along the way, and then you get the details as the principles start to clarify the picture. And as we grow closer to the Lord and His word continues to be a lamp to our feet and a light to our path, one step, one day at a time, you'll see where the adjustments need to be made. But just for the sake of the thought experiment, just for the sake of getting the gist, there is something to be said about when Jesus told us, look at the lilies, look at the sparrows, they neither toil nor spin, they don't worry about this stuff. And how much more would your Father, how much more does your Father care about you? And despite how beautiful and how awesome that picture is, one thing to remember though is that the birds don't just stand at the top of the tree with their mouths open up to the sky waiting for the worm to fall in. They still have responsibility. They still have their free will, if you will, in how much effort and engagement they have in this life to have, as He said, the things that you have need of, to have all of these things added unto you, what you need, what you cannot go without, beyond the basic stuff, food, shelter, clothing, etc. God determines what it is that we need. And as we delight ourselves in the Lord, He gives us the things to desire. And so the things that we will go after with the God-given abilities and ambitions and minds that we have. But also, He said, don't worry about it. Don't let that be the focal point of your life. Don't let that be the thing that dictates, well, I gotta pay the bills. Well, I gotta, because we do. You gotta pay the bills. And you gotta be a good example and be a model citizen and be a team player, be a family man, But are there not so many examples of people essentially throwing away their life, throwing away what they had, except they weren't throwing it away because they were seeking after the Lord and they were led by the Lord, but throwing away everything they had. And they were just fine because they were being led by the Lord. So the question is, how much are you willing to throw away? How much are you willing to sacrifice? How much are you willing to invest to store up treasures in heaven for the sake of glorifying the Lord? All the while being a good example of someone that has the fruit of the Spirit in them and takes care of themselves, the quality of life stuff, the being healthy because it's better and you're more useful on the vertical plane. All that's good and it's true and it's real, and we do have a tendency to go in the other direction as humans, to be complacent, to be lazy. So this is by no means, again, an excuse to just open our mouths and wait for him to drop the manna. But we do walk by faith, not by sight. We do have childlike, innocent trust and total dependence on the Lord, and allow him to sustain us with the things that he's put in our path and put in our hands, as it were, put in our strength. And again, it's totally case by case. There's no dogmatic rule on what kind of life you have to live other than the principles, because even the gray areas, even the things that aren't necessarily bad, where the non-essentials ought to have liberty and all things ought to be graced and with charity, although God does allow some people to have an abundance of things and to devote their lives to non-sacred things, and I'll touch on that in a moment. And God allows other people to have less, and God allows other people to be fully content and fully sustained and fully blessed, fully fulfilled in both scenarios and every one in between. But, and again, we say that and we think of it in this linear fashion that is completely hinged on the vertical plane and the physical existence and material things. But then it's only difficult for a rich man to get into heaven, and then you go away sad at the idea that you give up what you have for the Lord because you think that means you can't have stuff. But that only tells you that the stuff had you in the first place, because what it actually means is that all of the stuff that you have, you acknowledge was given to you from the Lord, and that it all belongs to him, and therefore it ought all to be used for him, because he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and he doesn't need anything from you. He gave, what do we have that we have not been given? Because on top of all that, he's also given us all things to enjoy. Again, he's a blessing, generous, good, sweet father. Sweet in the sense of very relational and very affectionate. But again, for the sake of the thought experiment, are you being led by the Lord in how much time you devote to one specific thing? And the reason I'm saying this, and the reason it's important, is because this idea of sustenance, of self-sustained living, to do well for ourselves, and to not need to worry, to do well for the ones that we love, to take care of things that we have, and to have ambition in this life, the God-given motivations, the things that we will do our good works before men, to do good things, and then they will ask, why are you so committed to your job? Why are you so committed to your family? Why are you so consistent? And it's because all of these things are from the Lord and for the Lord. And because all of these things here pale in comparison, the things of this world have grown strangely dim in the light of just pleasing the Father. But then that has an effect of a better quality of life and being blessed by the Lord, because we're walking in his will, and because we put everything in its proper place. Does that make sense? This goes everywhere, just like every other biblical principle, of course. And again, it's not black and white in probably 70% of the image. But anyway, back to what I was saying, the Western culture and the vertical, the horizontal plane. Have I been saying vertical plane this whole time? I don't know. The horizontal, this one, the physical realm, has so distracted and taken away from, and not that it's mutually exclusive, that because things are the way that they are, that's why things are the way that they are, but that the motivation behind the reason that mothers are separated from their children for the sake of the stuff, that fathers are separated from their families for the sake of the stuff, whether it's in a greedy and heaping up for yourselves kind of a way, or whether it's because we have to. Why families are taken away from the ministry in the sense of, not forsaking the gathering of believers. It doesn't, and this is where I would go back to the whole secular and sacred thing. There's no such thing as every single believer being a missionary and being a pastor and, not working a full-time job, whatever, not being involved in certain arenas, certain fields, because how could we have influence over people in those arenas if we didn't experience the things that they experience, if we didn't spend the time with them? And again, God's given us all things to enjoy, to experience, and He has a plan for all these things as long as they fall into place with the principles of, no, you don't go there because that's just flat out bad, certain industries, certain habits, practices, having certain things. Anyway, you get the idea. What was I saying? So there's a broad spectrum in God's will and God's purpose in our lives. There is no sacred and secular. Everything that is set apart, that is made korban, our heart, our mind, our body, our soul, our strength, our stuff, our relationships, it's all made sacred by what we do with it. So if it is God's will, again, not that you're separated from the body, from the church, not that you're separated from your families because it distorts the picture, the imagery, again, the principles, the essential things, the stuff that God has directly commanded. As long as all that's kept in place, then you have full freedom. That's why, was it Spurgeon said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and then do whatever you want. Because as we delight ourselves in the Lord, He gives us the things to desire, and we will please Him as we do the things that we want to do. Because what we want is what He wants. In that same way, we gotta stick to the principles, in essentials, unity, the two institutions of life, the church and family. And then everything else is, don't worry about it. Do what you need to do the right thing, but don't worry about it. And even within your family, even within the church, you're still just responsible for you and your actions and your attitude. But yeah, again, it's not, this helps not one bit in a direct way, but hopefully it helps and is a reminder, at least for the sake of perspective and for the sake of addressing, like I said, what I think has gone terribly wrong in so many of our lives. Not that God would condemn us for it, because in a lot of ways, like everyone, they're doing their best. They want to please the Lord. They want to do the right thing. But when we take it out of perspective, and I want to make sure I make this clear, I'm not claiming to know and to have the principles and to know what you ought to do and what I ought to do. But thought experiment, food for thought, something to consider, something to be praying about, and to let the Lord lead you on, and to allow Him to work out the outcomes and the details as He sees fit, and to be okay with that, because this life is too short. The day has enough evil of its own. Do the right thing. Use your mind. Use your resources. Use your body, your faculties. Use your time. But sanctify the Lord Christ in your heart. Always be ready to give a defense when someone asks you the hope that's in you, with meekness and fear, and having a clear conscience that in every little thing that I'm doing, nobody can say anything against me. I'm blameless before the Lord because everything's sacred unto Him. Everything is sanctified unto Him in my life. Not that it's something that we could boast about, and probably not something we could really achieve. Because even Paul, in every state that he had been in, he wasn't a perfect man, and we won't be either. But don't you know that I must be about my Father's business? My Father's business is for me to take care of my family, for me to do a good job at work, for me to be a useful part of the body of Christ. And XYZ, to be about the Father's business is to please the Father in all things. Be anxious for nothing, in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God, and then let the peace of God rule in you. Be willing to listen for the leading, and then be willing to follow. Not just be so scrambled around for the sake of not knowing. Don't let the things that you don't know and don't understand deter you. Let the things that you do know and that you do understand that God has spoken to you direct you. And then let him work out the rest. Let him reveal as you go. And then go home at the end of the day, when all is said and done. Yeah, so whatever that was worth, cool. And, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Things are not always as they seem, and things are not always as we think they ought to be. That's up to the Lord. That's between each man and his maker. God will provide, and God will discipline as necessary. So bottom line, just be in prayer, and I'm tired. Yeah, give it to the Lord and let it be. So I'm gonna let this be. Okay? Grace and peace and so forth. I'll see you when I see you. Yeah.